I'm happy to yield the floor to my friend and colleague, Will Inboden, to introduce and chair the first panel.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Galbraith, especially for those extra few minutes, which I can assure you these folks will not waste. Special thanks also to Douglas Bio and the Center for European Studies, as well as Professor Galbraith and the LBJ School and our many other sponsors for putting this together. It really is a wonderful occasion. A very fertile couple of days of inquiry awaits us, and it's an honor to be a part of it here as part of the ongoing, very dynamic policy discussions taking place at the University of Texas. First, a disclaimer, or perhaps even a confession. I am not an economist. I am rather an historian, and so I'm honored to be chairing this particular panel looking at the New Deal in the United States as a historical phenomenon, but drawing on what Professor Galbraith and Dr. Varoufakis both said, asking about what can this tell us for today. As a historian, there are really two ways of evaluating major policy initiatives in the past. One is, did it work? What were the consequences of it? But the second one, I think the more important one, and why we're here, is did that past policy initiative become a new paradigm? Did it become an image or a metaphor, as Professor Galbraith said, that takes on a life of its own, that then becomes a center of gravity, if you will, for evaluating or even inspiring new policy initiatives? The Marshall Plan might be one. People can quibble about whether it worked or not, but we all agree that the Marshall Plan, this interesting economic aid program from the late 1940s, is still a part of our discourse for today, even people who've never read the original history of it. Nixon to China, again, one can talk about the merits or demerits of that diplomatic opening, but it's become its own shorthand now, a Nixon to China moment on insert policy debate today. So also with the New Deal, and that's why we've got such a distinguished panel here to look into the New Deal in the United States to help set the terms of reference for our subsequent discussions over the next couple of days. You have the full bios of our panelists in your program, so I will not read all of them, but I'll just give you the brief affiliations as we're going to go down the line here. First next to me is Grzegorz Kolodsko of Kazminski University in Poland. Next, Mike Lind, here of the very building of the LBJ School at UT. Then Maria Paola Del Rossi from University of Teramo in Italy. Marshall Auerbach from Rewe Corporation. And then finally, Tom Ferguson of the Institute for New Economic Thinking. Tom, welcome back to the 40 acres. So the prodigal son returneth is a former faculty member here. All I'll say is this: the wisdom, the experience, the insights on this panel are virtually unlimited. But our time is not unlimited, and so each of them has agreed to do 10 minutes of opening framing remarks. We'll go in sequence down the line, and then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves, and then turn it over to you for Q&A. And I will be, I hope, charitable in my moderation, but ruthless in my time management. So, Professor Kolodko, you're up first.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to be here again. I wish we will meet here in 100 years, and I will ask you the question as the historian, how you judge the second and third decade on 21st century. We still argue what happened during the French Revolution, what was the substance of the Bolshevik Revolution, and now you want us to explain and to understand, first of all, what's going on. Well, the things happen the way they do because many things happen at the same time. There is a coincidence of the factors of not only economic, but also cultural, technological, political, social sides, which are making the reality which we try to understand, and at least some of us to advise or even to do, to change the situation for better, to have a better future. What's going on? I would point to 7 mega trends with a different time horizon from dozen years to a century, which must be taken into account when we are talking about the economic situation and the policy response to the challenges. The 7 challenges. First, this is demographic challenge, basically aging of the society. It's gone to be pre-productive age, productive age, and retirement. Now in the OECD countries, each second child, just my daughter became a mother, and we are OECD. I brought Poland to OECD in 1996. The life expectancy of each second child in the rich countries is 100 years. 100 years, it's not, a pattern for the economy where the retirement age is 60 or 65 years or even 70. We have to change the style of life, and there is also the challenge of migration. Second challenge, this is climate change. It's a very long shot. It's for generation to do, and most of us, we know what to do, but still there is long distance to political consensus how to act. The third one is technological change. The things happen, but this high-tech fever is a great deal of exaggeration. The life will not change as these gurus, including some economists, claim that everything will be different. Many things are different, but still we will have to dig, to manufacture, to transport, to sell in the grocery, the products and so on. The fourth challenge is inequality. On Tuesday I was speaking in Shanghai. They have slightly higher Gini coefficient. There are other measures too than you have in the US. Neither is sustainable in the longer run. You cannot run economic show with Gini over 45 points. It's simply unsustainable. So how to address the issue, I think it's a part to be answered within the nutshell of so-called New Deal. The fifth one is crisis of neoliberal capitalism and resulting crisis of liberal democracy. And that is much more bold issue than just the economic challenge. Neoliberalism is an ideology, but also an economic concept or quasi-theory, which by a wrong regulation, which they call deregulation, and manipulation of the financial fiscal system is enriching the few at the cost of many. And of course, it was leading to the crisis. And the answer for the crisis, counterpoint to neoliberalism, is populism and new nationalism. So now I have two enemies, because enemy of my enemy is not my friend. Neoliberalism is my very big enemy because it is wrong ideology and wrong economics and wrong economic policy for these challenges. And new nationalism is my enemy. Is it the type of Vive la France or Alternative für Deutschland or so? This is the new nationalism which one must distinguish from the old nationalism. Yes, China is nationalistic country, society, so is Russia, so is Turkey, but they are not against globalization. They are very much in favor of globalization because they know how to use the globalization on the behalf of the people and also the ruling elite. So the new nationalism is against globalization, and in my train of thought, globalization, which I defined as the process, historical, long-lasting, longer than our lifetime, of liberalization and integration of thus far performing to the extent separately national economies and the markets for capital goods and tradable services, and to the extent limited labor market into one interconnected world market. Despite your lovely President Trump, I wish that in the year and the next election we'll know already the name of the next 46th president of the United States, and it will be something different, somebody different. It's not the answer to these challenges. So we have now the problem of also political side, which is problem of crisis of liberal democracy. It's a beautiful system, but it's difficult to convince my students in Beijing or in Istanbul or in some other places like Cairo or Kiev, where I came from yesterday, that this liberal democracy, which we love so much and we are so proud also in the so-called post-communist Europe, is not delivering. The greatest compromise of liberal democracy we have in the most important market economies of the traditional capitalism, of the old deal, that is US and that is UK. The mess with Brexit is just a shame, and it shows that the liberal democracy is not able to answer simple questions. We answer it here at the auditorium. They are not able to answer them with the democratic procedures and the longest side of Icelandic parliament in the world. So this is also the very big challenge. And now the question is how to address the issues. I think that very much with Jamie Galbraith, there is no back to normal, if there was anything normal. If stupidity and short-sightedness is normal, okay, we are having another normal. We have to escape forward. We have to look for something new. I just attended a month ago at the invitation of Ned Phelps, a conference at Columbia University. It would not happen in my beautiful country of Poland. It would not happen to have such a title in any East European countries. Socialism was a part of the title. Progressivism, Socialism, and Nationalism. That was the title of the conference at Columbia University. So some American economists and political scientists are even talking about socialism as the possible future for answer for the future. Recently, I've seen, difficult to believe, a Pew Research outcome that for the age of 1829, so including all the students, say, of University of Texas too, when there was the question, are you in favor of capitalism, socialism? I don't know. 45% answered socialism, 45% answered capitalism, 10% said, I don't know. I think that, first of all, this is a matter of definition. What do you mean by socialism and what do you mean by capitalism? If there's neoliberal capitalism, I'm against. If it is social market economy of the Nordic type, of the Scandinavian democracies, which somebody may call socialism, I'm in favor. If you mean agenda of Senator Warren is socialism, I'm a socialist. If you mean, say, Bernie Sanders, well, we can discuss it to some extent, but this is a matter of definition. So you may call it new progressivism, you may call it New Deal, you may call it post-capitalism, you may call it collective capitalism, social market economy, but we must define what we are talking about. I'm with those in years coming with the proposition which is now in literature as new pragmatism. It's an outline, yet not very much developed yet, an outline, a sketch, say, profile of new economic thinking, of economic theory, both descriptive, attempting to explain how the things work, why it is as it is, and then through some axiology. There is no economics without axiology. We have to answer what we want. That means why we want more growth or more wealth or cleaner environment or longer life or more social cohesion or more fair distribution of income. These are the values. Economic activity is not void of the values. So when we are talking the values, we are close to political spectre, side of the spectre, and ideology. And then I'm coming to the normative, positive economics. Okay, you are so smart, you know how the things work, and you have some value of system, what is better? Tell us how to act, to change the reality in the future for better. Not for perfect, nobody is perfect, but us, but a little bit for better. Okay, so that's economic policy, but still we are the university. I'm one in two. Since I was critical of this ill-advised shock therapy, according to Washington Consensus Treaty of a quarter of a century ago, they invited me to join the government for a couple of times. I was Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. I was saying, following John Robinson, an answer of an economist is a question of policymaker. So if we deliver an answer as the economists with all different viewpoints and looking for a kind of consensus of a pragmatic approach, that's only the question for the policymakers, and they might have to take into account other factors which the economists are not taking into the equation. So I'm saying in my new pragmatism that we are in beyond GDP reality. Beyond GDP reality calls for beyond GDP economic theory. And then you must rely on this post-GDP, beyond GDP economic theory with your post-GDP economic policy and beyond GDP economic strategy. So my reading of idea of great American economists, I would say social scientist, researcher, Professor James Kenneth Galbraith with his New Deal, it is a quest for a kind of American for third and subsequent decades, strategy for development, which, according to my new pragmatism, must be triple balanced, not only economic, what we love to talk about, that is input, output, export, import, revenue, expenditures, savings, investment, but also it must be balanced on the social side, social cohesion, the term you used in Europe maybe too often without paying enough attention to, and you don't use almost at all in the United States. This is social justice. This is not to go too far with the income and wealth inequality because it can backfire against the society, as it may be seen from Santiago to now Bolivia, to the streets of some European advanced economies, and so on and so on. And that third equilibrium is an ecological one. I like very much this sentence from Galbraith's paper, which he sent 2 days ago to the conference participants, that climate challenge is a question of how to act for a century. And our macroeconomics, what most of us are teaching the students at the business school and the Department of Economics, is economic rationality in the very short-term perspective. So by taxing the consumption of environmentally friendly product contributing to the climate warming now, we cannot solve exclusively by this taxing the long-term problem. So new pragmatism is my proposition. I'm not naive that it will change the American thinking and acting, but it is just my small stone to the big garden of the discussion, how to look, how to search, how to create the New Deal. I don't think that it will be called the New Deal, but we will have the new name. When we started, we, the mankind, to shift to feudalism, nobody called it feudalism. When we started to shift to what is now capitalism, nobody called it capitalism. Where we were wrong and we started to shift to communism, it was called communism because before it became a reality, actually it was not a reality, never, ever, but it's another time of definition. We are in a quest for a new reality, new normal, because this is definitely not the end of history. I'm proposing new pragmatism. Definitely it will be not business as usual because it's been compromised and because of this mega trends I just mentioned. And my last question, we are talking about the New Deal in the United States. Well, it's only a part of the world, and the relative power of US is on the decline, and that will remain so in the foreseeable future, if not forever. Some other countries which are called by neoliberals emerging markets, by myself, emancipating economies are on the rise. I'm already calling the system we have in China, which is definitely an alternative and not a proposition for US and not for very many other countries, but maybe some countries in these emancipating categories of economies. I call it Chinism. So the future, it's not any kind of uniformism. We will have different political and economic systems, and the question is that they're supposed to be somehow compatible to keep us in a safe, secure, and peaceful development track as, humanity of 8, 9, 10 billion people. My optimism, if there is any, is coming from my knowledge, not from my belief. I rely on research and science, not on religion, on belief. It is that all these difficult questions, all this and each of these challenges, they have the solution. There is not determinism. It depends on the power of the man's mind. So if you want to have a successful story in the US for the generations to come, you do have to have a vision instead of illusion. Now you have an illusion in the White House. You have to have the leadership. Now you do not have. You have a caricature of leadership. And then you have to have the strategy. You are lacking the one. And for that reason, the United States is losing the time. Don't blame the others. Blame yourself. Don't blame us. We even are coming here from time to time to help you by sharing with you the good advice. Thank you.
Mike Lind.
So this is the 1940 Wendell Willkie versus Franklin Roosevelt presidential vote by state. But when the New Deal pattern had kind of crystallized, this is the county pattern, which is much more illuminating. So the New Deal, you have to understand, was taking place in the context of the post-Civil War political economy of the United States, in which the United States was essentially two countries. It was the urban industrial core of the Northeast and the Great Lakes, and it was the southern and western periphery, and you had economic specialization with manufacturing in the north and commodity exporting, cotton, cattle, mining in the south and the west. So if you look at the red, that's the Republican Party is the red. That's the old Lincoln to Hoover to Willkie Republicans. It was greater New Englanders, Yankees of Anglo-American descent, who had spread out along the Erie Canal to the upper Midwest, and a lot of Germans and Scandinavians. And they had been the core of the old Lincoln Republican coalition. The blue, which is largely the South, plus the western sections is the Democrats, then still a predominantly Southern party. If you look at Texas, by the way, the red counties in central Texas are mostly German Americans who had been pro-Union and pro-Lincoln. They were persecuted by the Confederates. Austin was one of these areas. They had been persecuted by the Ku Klux Klan. So all the way up until the 60s, they voted for the Republicans as the Lincoln Party. Kennedy County, way down in the South, was puzzling. I looked it up. They have 400 people today. They had about 800 at the time. It was essentially a couple of big ranches owned by two Anglo families, the Kings of the King Ranch, and the Kennedys and their ally, the very wealthy Mexican-American family, the Iturias. And they had a political machine, and it usually voted for the Democrats, but in 40 and 44, I don't know why, they just hated Roosevelt. They voted for the Republicans. So, okay, so let's go to the blue dots up inside of the red area there. These are mostly manufacturing cities where the proletariat was largely European immigrants and their first and second generation descendants. Irish, Germans, Italians, Poles, Croats, and so on. And the Lincoln to Hoover Republican coalition had the triumph of industrial capitalism, but it left out two groups who had also been left out in Europe. In the late 19th century, it was farmers and commodity producers, and it was factory workers. The Southern Democrats and Midwestern Democrats under William Jennings Bryan, the agrarians, were never able to win over the Northern industrial workers. There's just too much cultural difference and suspicion. But Roosevelt finally manages to unite these two groups briefly with consequences that are better for one side than for the other. So you can think of the New Deal in regional terms as being two separate programs in two separate countries. So in what one historian has called the Republic of the North, it was about integrating labor, the factory proletariat and the service sector proletariat, into the system as part of some kind of tripartite corporatist system with business and government. And I won't go into the details. The first New Deal had a sectoral bargaining approach that collapsed for various reasons. Then the second New Deal, you had pro-labor legislation, which became the framework that we still have to this day. But so here you have in World War II, the Roosevelt administration having made organized labor part of its constituency solidly, had a maintenance of membership rule that greatly ballooned unions in the US during World War II and war production factories. So in the North, and many historians of the New Deal are Northeastern liberals and leftists, and they tend to think of the New Deal as a version of social democracy and of the labor movement, which it was in the Northern and Midwestern states. But there's this other element that tends to be neglected. So in the peripheral region, in the South and the West, the New Deal was all about state capitalism. It's not about progressive social democracy. Often you had Southern and Western business leaders who were quite reactionary, but they saw this alliance with Northern labor as a way to tax the Northern industrial capitalists to pay for their infrastructure. There's a great quote from the young Lyndon Johnson in the 1930s. He's asked by a skeptical Texan, well, who's going to pay for all these dams and so on? And he says, the rich Yankees. So from that point of view, it was a nation-building project getting the South and the West up to the standards of the older industrial states. Rural electrification was one, building hydropower dams, the two big hydropower projects, and these are state capitalist projects. But they're done on behalf of local economic development. One was the Tennessee Valley Authority. The second biggest one was the Lower Colorado River Authority, the chain of highland lakes out here west of Austin. So you have electrification. You have the highways. Everybody talks about Eisenhower's interstate highway system because it passed in the 50s, and Eisenhower threw his weight behind it. actually, it should be called Roosevelt's Interstate Highway System. He commissioned 4 reports. Through his 4 terms as president, he fought unsuccessfully to get Congress to build the Interstate Highway System. On this map, you see the actual lines drawn by Roosevelt with his own pen of what he thought the highways should be, including some north-south highways, which we could still use. So with World War II state capitalism, and remember, the Democratic Party is largely a Southern party at this time. It's controlled by Southern members of Congress. This really ramps into high gear. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which had been bailing out banks and small businesses during the 1930s, becomes is funding war production. So you obviously get a lot of it in the old northeastern factory districts, but the Southern barons in Congress have the federal government just build military factories in the South and the West. This continues in the early Cold War, creating what is called the gun belt. A lot of these factories after World War II, in the biggest example of mass privatization in human history, before the Soviet Union privatizes the industrial sector, were sold for nominal rates to the private sector, having been built by the federal government to develop the South and the West. The result of this by the 50s and 60s is the Sun Belt, of which Texas is kind of an anchor, also Florida. So to the Sun Belt, you get a migration over half a century of population. This from the right-wing group ALEC. This shows net domestic migration, not international. And you see, that the older Great Lakes Northeast Industrial Region is losing domestic migrants to the South and the Southwest, with the exception of Louisiana and Mississippi. Okay, so this shows you the growth of what are called right-to-work laws in the states. It starts off with Arkansas and Florida, and gradually, by today, it takes over most of the country. Now, right-to-work laws are essentially anti-union laws. They weaken and cripple unions. So in this Faustian bargain between the Southern and Western economic developers and the Northern industrial workers, there was a brief alliance where they would support the Northern industrial workers in the North, but not in our part of the country, okay? So the alliance breaks down in 1938 when there's a backlash against the New Deal, particularly in the South. And from 1938 up until the late 50s, early 60s, the Kennedy-Johnson years, you get in what's called the conservative coalition governs Congress. It's conservative pro-business Republicans and conservative Southern Democrats. So you see the same thing here. This is states with right-to-work laws. So you see basically the South conquered the North in terms of imposing its anti-union low-wage system on northern states, which increasingly in the old Rust Belt, their legislatures have adopted right-to-work laws in the hope of being able to compete for the location of factories and production with the southern anti-union states. Here we have manufacturing as of 2014, and you see that the old New Deal pattern of the industrial core and the southern periphery is gone. You now have this continuous manufacturing belt, the old so-called Rust Belt, and this newer manufacturing belt in Appalachia and the Ozarks, where both American firms and European firms have transferred production to take advantage of lack of unions and low wages, and they've also done this obviously to Mexico and China and other places. So here's union membership. As I say, it peaks during World War II, then goes down slowly and then very rapidly. It's 10.7% in 2017. I think it's about 6% private sector union. So it's almost literally decimated. Decimation means more than 10 in the United States. And my final slide is, this is from the Economic Policy Institute. It's the link between, a correlation between union membership and wage dispersion. And it's something striking, certainly. So I think if you think of the New Deal as a left-wing project that's pro-labor and social democratic, that makes a certain amount of sense within the Northeast and Midwest. If you pull your camera back and look at it on a continental scale, the real winners over a century are the Southern economic elites who temporarily ally themselves with Northern labor in order to get to tax the Northern industrialist in order to pay for infrastructure and industry, and then end up robbing much of the population and the jobs from the older northeastern states. What this implies for a Green New Deal, others may decide. Thank you.
Okay. Professor Del Rossi.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be here, and I would like to thank for the organizing committee for my invitation today. Giuseppe Amari and I are the co-editor of the Italian translation of the President Roosevelt book, Looking Forward. We have chosen the subtitle of Politics Against the Initial Crisis, a comment for the comment edition of Friendly Delano Roosevelt Tax with a proviso by Professor Galbraith. Our background research for this volume is the result of a reflection carried out in the years where Italy and more generally Europe faced the disruptive facts of the United States crisis of 2007-2009. At this time, the discussion with Professor Galbraith is inspiration behind our project about the long-term relationship between Europe and the United States were connected to the need for a New Deal, the European debate, and even beyond. Our main aim for this book is to offer a new subject for reform project debates of the Western society. As now looking forward is a classic of economic ideas, but also an historical text as underlined by the subtitle Politics Against the Initial Crisis, recalling an Italian economist articles, Federico Caffè. Caffè showed Roosevelt's ability to translate popular radicalism into the New Deal reform and strategy recovery programs with expertise and pragmatism. In fact, Roosevelt imposed a new political concept of which avoid dogmas in theology, based on writing and speech of this elusive American icon as was defined. The aims of our books were to reconstruct Roosevelt's principles, values, programs on one of the most significant national versions, thanks to which capitalism managed to overcome the crisis and to preserve democracy. At the same time, we want to highlight the New Deal importance beyond the U.S. borders in the 20th and in the 20th century interpretation to restore this text in a global history in accordance with the recent historical reconstruction by Patel. During the wrath of a real crisis of modernity, Roosevelt strongly affirmed the need for a fundamental change in our economic thought. This change was clear through in his new reform strategy and in the setting of a radical transformation of the relation among the government, its power structure, and the main economic productive government organization. Our volume is informed by economic, political, and social analysis of Roosevelt and his intellectual staff roles in the transformation of capitalism and in the definition of a new socio-political paradigm. We also wanted to focus on his leadership skills and his innovation in terms of political communication. We think that in this age of populism and sovereignism in America and in Europe, it becomes evident how relevant Roosevelt still is today when he says that the only way to prevent extremism when the people are severely hit by the economic crisis is to offer a workable program of reconstruction. A program of reconstruction may even be radical as long as it proves to be realistic. is a strategy focused on the regulatory state role and also on the constructive role of politics facing the disorder of the crisis, and on the role of political parties seen as mediators. The most important aspect of his analysis was the necessity of building up consensus by setting and reaching goals. This is clearly in contrast with populism, where consensus is a given. And one of the Roosevelt's great skills was his ability to offer a vision. Through his speeches, he narrated an alternative route to overcome the crisis which completely subverted the Republican political priorities. Therefore, according to Roosevelt, the change in economic thought had to go hand in hand with the refundation values, which were integral parts of his government program. We think also to the contrast between reform and recovery and between the debate between Roosevelt and Kennedy in this period. Another aspect that we want to emphasize is the peculiar character of Roosevelt Reformism, the aim of which was to redistribute income and power. Franzini defined it as a non-elite government. Roosevelt's novelty was the construction of an economic constitutional order on the one hand and the definition of a new economic policy on the other. He subverted the predominant approach in order to state that the right to employment is a basis of social order and must therefore be guaranteed through a transformation of productive and distributional institutions. Roosevelt's communicative skills and his use of the new media were one of the key to his success. Roosevelt was an extraordinary author, and radio was his favorite medium to task the citizen, the crisis, but also to make the population part of the resolution and development of his reform activity. The American president succeeded in rallying society and the intellectuals. Together we cannot fail in increasing the potential consensus for the New Deal policy. It was a revolutionary project in which was confronted with the stiff resistance, also in relation to the stimulating and regulatory new role now played by the federal state. The inclusion of organized work represented by trade unions, among the other founding elements for American values and identities, is another subject emerging from our research. The meaningful constitutional transformation allowed the United States to exit the crisis of capitalism in a very unique way, that is through the consolidation of relations among liberal political institutions, capital system, and the social issue. The reform strategy set by the Roosevelt combined with other two elements of renewal typical of American capitalism. The Fordism achievement as a crucial factor for the reorganization of manufacturing system, separation between the control and the common function of major oligopolies and the shareholder fragmentation property, as showed by Burr and Means. From this point of view, the New Deal represented a unique tool to overcome the crisis, enabling the conciliation of democracy and capitalism, but still it was a response to a global challenge. Besides, as underlined by Patel, the 1930s were a protean moment where the search for the modernity favored an opening to the experimentation of unorthodox political and economic solutions. The New Deal framework paved the way to the forthcoming global hegemony of the United States of America and for the affirmation of multilateralism, which gained an extraordinary irreversible impetus from the militarization of an economy that took place at the beginning of the 1940s. Roosevelt's New Deals had also an important international impact if we consider both the federal state role in the implementation of a global political agenda, immigration, state actors, culture, and so on, and the level of the United States relations with Europe on one side and with Asia Pacific on the other. Talking about the transnational relation, how the New Deal can have a value for Italy and Europe today. Of course, the global capitalism is totally different. However, there is a need to overcome the inequalities produced by the new productive and financial oligarchies. Nowadays, recession is the result of Trump commercial and international wars against China and the European Union, but it also due to Chinese slowdown. Meanwhile, the old continent, another crisis factor, could arrive in the event of no deal Brexit for the UK. In this context of globalization, failures, and populism and sovereignism predominance, the New Deal is and its values, together with the use of the Keynesian policies, may not be the answer to the crisis, but still they can be tools to prevent it and to cushion its effect on the European Union, and more specifically in Italy. An example is important example is the Green New Deal for Europe project that also recalls the Marshall Plan, and thought. On the other hand, even the New Deal of Roosevelt was green. He planted millions of trees to make barriers against the cyclone that swept the USA from the north to south. So, in conclusion, CAFE hope for a world where civic and social development is not the byproducts of economic development, but a consciously achieved aim, which beautifully captured the spirits of the New Deal, seem to still be valid today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I promised Will I would keep within my 10 minutes, and so I will do so. First of all, I wanted to thank Jamie Loveday for inviting me. The organization, as always with these conferences, is excellent, and so very much appreciated. It's also an honor to be back at the esteemed LBJ School of Government, named after a great Democratic president whose signature social achievements Democrats have spent the last several decades seeking to eviscerate. So, we're not here to talk about LBJ, though. We're here to talk about FDR, the New Deal. A few of my remarks were foreshadowed by Jamie's opening remarks. When I first started looking at the New Deal, I too succumbed to what I would say is the conventional view developed really over the last few decades, which is to say that the New Deal, fancy label, it didn't do a lot, and that it was really World War II, which helped to restore the economic recovery and end the Great Depression. And I was always surprised by that because, I'd grown up thinking that, it had been a great Keynesian experience and had worked remarkably well. So I began to do a little bit more research on this and came across a couple of interesting papers. The first of which was one by Michael Darby. It was called The Case of the Missing 3 Million Workers. He wrote this in the mid-1970s. Darby predicated his research on the work of the great labor economist Stanley Labergott, who worked for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Labergott's great insight was that all of these people that had been working under Roosevelt's programs such as the CCC, the WPA, and constructing all these wonderful monuments, infrastructure, etc., they were generally not incorporated into the employment statistics. There had been nothing of this kind before, so there really was a sense that even though these people were being paid by the government, they were receiving an income, they were going to work on a daily basis, they were not considered to be employed. So as a result, they were not incorporated into statistics, and if you take those 3 million some odd workers out of the numbers. And of course, yes, unemployment, it doesn't really do much at all. It stays around 1/3 of the population remain unemployed if you look at those official statistics. If you do incorporate Labour-Gott's findings, as Darby did, then you'll find it presents a very, very different sort of story. You actually had, from 1932 to 1936, unemployment going from about 30% to just under 10%, 9.7%. Now, that's still high, but it's quite a remarkable achievement. And I think also it explains why Roosevelt triumphed so decisively as he did in 1936, because it really was a tremendous success. What's interesting is that, of course, I think there has been a political agenda. This revisionist view of the New Deal started coming around the 1980s when a very different sort of agenda, the market fundamentalist agenda, started was taking over. And so there was this ideological predisposition to diminish the achievements of fiscal policy in general, to uphold the value of independent monetary policy, and of course, so the Roosevelt's New Deal did nothing narrative fits into that. What's interesting is that you have a lot of liberal historians and journalists who have, by and large, been very sympathetic to Roosevelt, and they have largely accepted this new narrative. I've talked to people like Jonathan Alter, who wrote a very good account of Roosevelt's first 100 days. And also Doris Kearns Goodwin. And when I remember speaking to Jonathan and actually saying, are you aware of this alternative data that's out there? And the odd thing is that they usually are, but they say, well, I don't really want to get into a big debate about it. So they exclude it. They exclude what is one of the signature achievements of the New Deal. And it's I think maybe symptomatic of the lack of self-confidence that liberals and progressives have today, that they are so reticent to make this case. Interestingly enough, the one person who has also embraced this narrative is my fellow Canadian, Conrad Black, who wrote actually a very good book on FDR. He had a bit of spare time on his hands about a decade ago when he wrote this. And I guess it freed him up for some more liberal-minded thinking. But even though he is today a rabid Trump supporter, Black commented on the irony that these workers that built a number of airports in the New York area, that employed people like Pollock, and as Jamie mentioned, built many of the signature monuments that you could see around here in Austin, as well as planting millions of trees by the Conservation Corps. He cited all of these examples, and the other point he made is that the America Firsters of Roosevelt's day, people like Charles Lindbergh, so another interesting parallel. They didn't really acknowledge the success of the New Deal, did admire the economic reconstruction policies that were being deployed by Hitler and Nazi Germany in the 1930s. And of course, one of the reasons why Germany had this great economic miracle was because they were employing slave labor. Some of the earlier concentration camps were already in place there. And these workers, ironically, were included in Germany's employment statistics. So we have this anomalous situation where, slave labor is incorporated into fascist countries like Germany. And this is considered a signature achievement and a sign of how successful that fascist ideology is. And yet, in the US, Roosevelt's great achievements are undermined and diminished over this period. So, and I think that's one of the more interesting things about this. Now, I've written this paper. It is on the website, and I wrote it about pointing out all these inconsistencies. I wrote this about 11 years ago. At the time, of course, the circumstances seem more broadly similar to the 1930s, given the high levels of unemployment at the time. It is unfortunate, I think, that we still had a Congress and even indeed a government, a president at the time, who I think lacked the courage to really make the case for the New Deal. I was always struck by the fact that President Obama invoked Teddy Roosevelt quite a lot of the time, but he very seldom, and he invoked Lincoln as well, but he very seldom invoked FDR or indeed LBJ. So, but I don't really want to get into too much of a discussion about what the new Green New Deal should be doing, other than to say that if you look, as Jamie had said in his introduction, if you look at the Roosevelt's New Deal, it was transformative. It did fundamentally change the way that the U.S. System worked. There was obviously some reversion after the fact, but it was a genuinely progressive agenda. It was not an attempt to go back to the status quo ante. It was an attempt to construct something genuinely new, distinctly American. I would say I don't want to put a label on it, but it was certainly not an attempt to go back to the 1920s and restore that form of capitalism. And I think that that's something that Democrats need to bear in mind today as they advocate a transformation. That going back to the status quo ante, you could argue that's what gave us Donald Trump in the first place, and so it's not a logical place to start one's program going forward. And so I think that's the key, one of the key lessons that one ought to learn from the New Deal, and it's something that the Green New Dealers ought to ponder as we go forward. And I think that's the most important thing that they should consider when considering their programs in the context of FDR's New Deal. And I think I'll stop it there and leave it for questions and discussions, but first on to Tom. So thank you.
Thank you, Marshall, and Tom is up. And just for the record, Marshall has 36 seconds remaining he could have used, and so we'll give those to you in your Q&A. Or you may want to donate those to it.
I'll give them to Tom. He has probably something more useful to say. So.
Well, actually, thank you, Marshall. The extra 36 seconds, I'll just say he is certainly right that most of the recent historiography on the New Deal is pretty much junk. So, however, was much of the old stuff, though it got some of the achievements right, sometimes almost by inadvertence, but because the people were still living with the memory of people being fed when they were starving and things like that. But I had a very graphic experience of that when I was a grad student at Princeton, and I was starting my thesis, and somebody said to me, Ivy Lee's papers are over in Mudd Library. So I thought to myself, all right, now I knew who Ivy Lee was. He was the guy who, along with Edwin L. Bernays, invented modern public relations. Ivy Lee was the person who told John D. Rockefeller to start giving dimes to kids and change his image. And he also managed a lot of PR for Standard Oil and other companies. Anyway, so I go in there and I pull up within about 3 minutes Lee's record of his face-to-face interview with Franklin Roosevelt. And he's written the thing down as a dialogue, which is a pretty common thing for folks in that situation to do. There are lots and lots of those around in various archives, mostly not used by historians. Anyway, so Roosevelt and Lee are having a discussion. This is in roughly October or so of 1933, when the dollar is bouncing around and everybody is in turmoil. And Roosevelt is explaining to him fairly straightforwardly how he wants to get the dollar below the pound, and he's want to cut the British advantage, which they'd already depreciated. And as I'm reading this, I'm realizing, this guy is not an international economist, but he has a fairly clear view. When I got to MIT and started teaching, Charles Kindleberger just told me, who'd actually, in an extended sense, worked for Roosevelt. He said, I just think FDR didn't really know what he was doing. He was just sort of like a quarterback calling plays. Well, that kind of thing that's written down in Lee's papers just shows you that view is not true. And that's from that point I started working in an awful lot of archives in and out of the United States, and I sort of changed all my views about the New Deal. Now, I'm not going to try to sell you my views on the New Deal today. I want to focus on my one slide, and I'll explain this. I'm going to begin with it, I'm going to end with it, and I want to explain the relevance of the New Deal. to it. My paper's up there somewhere too, my old one, in international organization. So if you are curious whereupon I get these views, you can read them. Anyway, this is not up there, but this is from my colleague Paul Jorgensen, and Ji Chen and I have been doing political money for quite a while. We do it very differently from everybody else, never mind how or why. When you actually do totals, this is from 2016, and of course what I'm going to tell you is that 2020 is going to look like this. If you notice these lines, what they are is a plot, the size of the contributions. Now we do true sizes, that is to say Obama, I saw the email, so I know they did this, where they told donors to do small contributions so that they could do repeats. Now, all kinds of witless folks then wrote it up as Obama had a massive small donations. We catch those because we use the same type of software the hospitals use to tell when they've got the same patients to amalgamate the names. Anyway, so when you do this on 2016, what you find, does this have a pointer to it? Can I get this? No. No, okay. Look at Sanders. The easiest way to find Sanders over there where it's 100,000 plus, he's the bottom line there. He has essentially no big money. This is a plot of how much, what size of contributions are coming in and what percentage of their total money are those contributions. That's going up the left-hand scale there. Think of that as that one as 100%, if you like. You can think of those as percents. And basically what it's saying is Bernie Sanders got nearly 60% of his cash from the very smallest contributions below $200. And then he got basically nothing else. It's a genuinely small money funded thing. It's the first time I've ever seen this, and I've been looking at political money in American history for hundreds of 200 actually times. You might see something of this in state elections and things like that, but you do not see presidential candidates, not even the populist candidacy of Bryant shows that, because he had a lot of silver companies enthusiastic about free silver. Whereas everybody else in both parties is sitting there with very high percentages of big donors. Trump is an interesting case because he does have, he is the, whatever you want to call that stupid little bluish gray line. He has a very substantial chunk of small money too, but he's got an enormous amount of big money. It's a barbell type, which is very characteristic of a certain kind of fake populism, meaning it's barbell at the bottom and on the other end, and then there's not a lot in between. The point here is this is a genuine class conflict story. That's what you've got in the United States right now. What's going on in the Democratic Party is a fight between big and small money. Everything else is rhetoric. There, that's the first point to grasp. Now, what's the relevance of this to the New Deal? Well, all right, it's a misunderstanding of the New Deal to think that story ended up prevailing. That's really not true. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you were again in a situation of intense class conflict. There was very strong mobilization from below. And, you know, for the first time in, well, a couple of generations, here we are again. You know, you presumably read about Michael Bloomberg's direct face-to-face colloquy with Elizabeth Warren, where he just told her, you know, you just don't understand how much our great companies like mine build America. Or Leon Cooperman breaking down on TV. That's quite a clip. There are a lot of other folks like this. An editor worth about $800 million and I bumped into each other at a cocktail party the other week, and she said to me, well, you know, we've got to get more rich people on the side of Elizabeth Warren. And I said, wait a minute, the wealth tax. I don't think that's going to happen. They said, oh, no, we're not all beasts like... Well, she named a guy who had supported the minimum wage in Seattle. We're past the minimum wage in Seattle or any place else point. You now have very large numbers of utterly miserable people. You've got teachers who can't make a living, you know, teaching. You know, they're not all breaking bad, but nothing is breaking good for these folks. And yes, you do see substantial organizing. Much of it is coming sometimes against the advice of the formal labor leaders, though sometimes they are also constrained by state law. They can't support the strike, but they need to. I would remind you that in the New Deal, even though the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, was all the time being asked to come help organize stuff, in the end, the CIO had to organize. They had a split. John L. Lewis actually did hit the head of the AFL and then famously walk out of a meeting there. You know, you may be at that type of a situation. Anyway, let me now try to explain what I think the significance of the New Deal is and compare it to where you're at right now. Bluntly, when you look at the New Deal, I think you see several phases. That's not going to be news to anybody on this platform. That first New Deal did fall apart. It had some significant reforms. You know, the Securities and Exchange Commission first version got done then. Glass-Steagall got done then. Some other things, and a lot of people got put back to work. But fundamentally, it fell apart. And in '35 came the second New Deal amid an awful lot of mass mobilization from below as the whole structure of national labor relations broke up there. And you know, remember that Roosevelt and Francis Perkins were not in favor of what finally passed as the Wagner Act. That point it tends to get lost in a lot of roseate accounts of the New Deal. Anyway, so you get the Wagner Act in the summer of '35. You get the Social Security bill, which also contains unemployment insurance. You get the Public Utilities Holding Company Act, talking of Green New Deals. You can start by restructuring utilities there. And then you get a lot of other things, of which in Texas and elsewhere, a point much appreciated, the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact enabling legislation and the Connolly Hot Oil Act. Those were vital to fixing the price of oil, and oil was in effect given its own sort of little cartelization pass. That put the modern system of oil price control in place that stuck until actually the early '70s, centered on the Texas Railroad Commission. You know, none of this, perhaps, if you're in Texas, will be entirely news, but this stuff tends to drop out of the history. What that produced was a very substantial influx of oil money into Roosevelt's reelection campaign, and more broadly, as the Republican nominee came around to commit himself to protection, a huge movement for free trade. I'm not making it up. You can read the quotes in my international organization piece from 1984. People were actually, brokers and bankers were holding rallies in the final days of 1936 election demanding that Roosevelt be elected with people, well, some of them, hyperbole, they were saying things like, oh, there'll be a revolution if Roosevelt's not reelected. You don't find that in the standard histories, but it was true. My favorite story, of course, embodying everything about the next 60 or so, 70 years, Ellsworth Bunker, a sugar refiner who wanted it in with low tariffs from Cuba and elsewhere, he was among those giving the cash, and of course it was Bunker who had to step out into the helicopter finally in Vietnam. That could be thought of as a sort of metaphysical, disastrous end of a kind of international imperialism that coalition finally did do. But the point is that in '35, you get many reforms, but in '38, everything comes a cropper. Now, I was astonished when I was in Utah a couple weeks ago. They told me that they had run a PBS special out there in which, on Mariner Eccles, and I guess Eccles, somebody had told those folks that Eccles had opposed raising interest rates in '38. That's nonsense. I've read those papers, and Eccles, who owned one of the big 6 construction companies, was crazed on the construction wage thing by then. Lachlan Curry, and they were sending him, actually sometimes every 2 or 3 days, latest quotes on construction labor there. Anyway, as presumably everybody who's looked at this realizes, they raised rates and they cut spending and they sort of destroyed the economy. The 37-38 downturn is actually as deep as the depression. It just didn't last as long there. It came back because Beardsley Rummel from the Rockefeller Foundation famously took a plan to Roosevelt for spending, and Roosevelt embraced it, and they used it for a while, but they didn't really believe it. It was really the 40s, the war, that sort of gave you modern Keynesianism, if you like, to the extent it ever took hold in the United States. I have some trouble with the pure state capitalism line in the South, though, that my friend Mike has. Here's the problem. When you look closely, you discover a very interesting thing in the war, which is that in the National Labor Relations Board had a policy strongly encouraged by the administration's people, not all of them, of course, that they wanted to raise wages in the South as fast as possible. So they tried effectively when Southern unions brought cases to the NLRB usual response was, we're going to go along with labor. That was part of a broad policy of trying to raise the South. It was supported even by some of the Eastern financiers. You can read Bernard Baruch's letters to Roosevelt. He had a plantation in South Carolina. It's too facile to say that the Southern barons or anyone was allied with Northern labor. What actually happened is Northern labor was trying to organize the South. Operation Dixie was the big disaster. They made an effort to organize the textile industry in, I forget, 46 or 47, right at the end of the war. And that was not a good time for any labor union anywhere, and it failed. That was in that sense, there were very strong, even pro-union components. There was even a brief period when unionization in Texas was fairly high. I knew the guy who helped make that happen, J.R. Parton, who gave a lot of money to this university and who was chairman of the board in the mid-30s. He was an oilman. He was the guy who introduced John Connally to Lyndon Johnson. One could go on like that, but the point is, no, it was more than just state capitalism. There was a labor coalition down. It was wiped out basically in the McCarthy period, if you use that term broadly, though we understand that was a little later. The late 40s had a predecessor in that before McCarthy. Now, what's the relevance of this to now? Well, here's my take. When you look at what Roosevelt did, well, you can see that he has to deal with an enormous amount of labor conflict and successful unionizing by unions. That sometimes scared him too. I mean, the stories about him, when he said to somebody, make me do some of these reforms, it's like, this is a little bit like Barack Obama promising you reform, right? And then you get Larry Summers. It wasn't so clear that everybody liked everything. The point was, in 35 and 36, you got big chunks of the business community, the whole free trade side of it, and there the Southern connection was very important. It was Cordell Hull, a fanatic free trader, who was at the heart of that, along with just about everybody else in the South at that point. The South had been the traditional, big exporters of cotton and tobacco. That stuff fades away later. That's another story. Point is, though, that there you get splits in the business community, and especially in finance, which we don't have time for, but which are very important. They are in stuff I've written. You can read it if you care. The point is that the New Deal cannot be read as a pure expression of, if you like, social democracy. It is a heavily business coalition. Roosevelt got much more money in 36 from various businesses than he did from labor unions, though the entry of labor unions contributing at all created a sensation. The question is, what's going to happen now? I'm not sure. You have an intense class conflict. You have a billionaire paranoid breakdown in a fair number of cases. Some of this is in the newspapers, some of it isn't, but the anxiety's everywhere. And the question will be, what would happen? I mean, I know there's pressure on Warren to, consider all kinds of strange vice presidents. Her equivalent of John Nance Garner, if you like, which is the reason that the King Ranch didn't go for Roosevelt in 1940. He'd been dumped by Roosevelt there. But there's all kinds of pressures going on in the Democrat Party. You'll just have to see what happens. But industry splits, and we are a long way from where they were in 1935 and 36. While there's some labor organizing, the GM strike failed in Tennessee there. And the GM strike I don't regard as a big victory for all the workers. And so we'll just have to see what happens. I think the future is sort of open, but if people are trying to tell you that if you like, you can just you could win the election on just climate change and guns, to quote, I believe that's close to a direct quote from Bloomberg and some others, I think you're way mistaken. I would not settle for less than a real Green New Deal. That is to say, you can save the world, but you can also get it in social justice and income redistribution. And my guess is if you will not successfully do climate change without serious social change. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, before we turn it to the audience for any questions, first a chance for our panelists. Any further comments, any answers, any remonstrances? Professor Lind, I heard a somewhat different interpretation of the state capitalism and the Southern New Deal there.
No, I just stayed within my 10 minutes, and so I couldn't go into detail.
Any other panelists with anything to say?
It's not a comment, but rather an observation. When I was seeing the slide about electricity at the time of New Deal, you should show the other slide from the very same time from the Soviet Union. There was the famous saying by Lenin that communism is the power of Soviets and electrification. So that was also, about electrification, and the design is almost identical. They did have different economists, but they have the similar designers. And my comment is a serious one. I came first time to this great country of the United States in 1977, a different war. Cold War, which I now call First Cold War, because we do have the Second Cold War. That is the seventh megatrend of our time. This Second Cold War has been also declared by so-called West, with the United States at the helm. And if you won the First Cold War, and that was the push for our transition to market and democracy, in which I did play some role, this Cold War is impossible to win. You will not win this Cold War. I mean, you, the West, or we, the West, but nor the other side. There will be not the winner, and the economic question is who will pay more. So this is economics of failure, not economics of gains. And now the political economy and the economic strategy is how to get rid of this mess which is being created by the Second Cold War, which is making much more harm than good, how long it will be lasting. And of course, there is no solution without a major, significant, fundamental contribution from the United States under the new leadership. And maybe the new leadership will have something which will be similar to what Professor Galbraith and others mean by New Deal. But going back to 77, when I came to the United States, I was very young, younger than I am now. I'm still very young, but I was younger. I was coming with the conviction that the most popular word in this country is money. And I was very much surprised that the most often heard word was enjoy. I said, well, that's different, in this bloodsucker capitalist country, they enjoy the life and they are not only talking about money. But I was trying to understand since, for a long period of time, how it is possible that in this free world, majority of the people can make a wrong decision by electing the wrong leaders at the difficult time, which are not able to meet the challenges over and over and over again. Sometimes correct decision, sometimes wrong. So that now, fast forward, we have so-called fake news. My book published by Columbia University Press in 1911 derived the title. The original title was a different one, but they took the title from the title of the first chapter. where truth, errors, and lies is coming from, and what to do to tackle the challenge. And the book is called Truth, Errors, and Lies, Economics and Politics in a Volatile World. So the big problem with New Deal or New Progressivism or New Pragmatism is that we would like to create this better future for us and for the next generation in democratic environment. But why there is the failure of an of the liberal democracy? We've seen it. Because you are buying the votes. You have millions, the rich people pay for managing the information, for manipulation of the public opinion. The freedom is that, okay, go and vote. But the fair freedom is free choice if you are informed. What is the alternative? What is the cost of input and what is the gain of an output? And most of people don't know it. Even very many economists, they don't understand it because, the economic calculus now is a different one. We have to bring into the equation ecological and the social aspect, not only the economic one. How to value, the future clean air, again, some constraints of too much of consumption contemporary, and so on and so on. So the manipulation of public opinion, which is not a problem of an economic nature, basically, but is very much linked to it. The things happen the way they do because many things happen at the same time. There is not a proper solution. And that is the water on the mill of kind of, strong central government. The big challenge for the future is, one may say, New Deal. But, not with this so-called liberal democracy, because it's not going to fly. We need some strong man, like Erdogan, if he's strong, or Putin, or maybe even as Xi Jinping, It's an authoritarian regime, but it is meritocracy. And you have in US or in UK, if you wish, and in very many other countries, maybe even in my Poland, you have a democratic government, but far short from meritocracy. So this is the cost we pay for the beauty of democracy. Democracy is sometimes incompatible with efficiency. A New Deal is about efficiency and social cohesion. So the question is how to combine everything, how to bring more meritocracy, how to cultivate democracy, but how to get rid of this manipulation of democracy by the haves at the cost of the have-nots. So that's my comment. And some postscriptum to what I have said before. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Okay.
Why it is so cold here, huh? Why you are wasting so much energy? This is the market economy or it is the dirigism. But it's wrong.
And with the questions, we do ask that they be followed by a question mark.
I really enjoyed this panel. I thought that you all really, unlike some other panels I've seen on the New Deal, you all really kind of honed into a serious conversation about this issue about state capitalism versus sort of social democratic pieces. The question I have is, I would like the panel to reflect on what does it mean for in the contemporary United States that the peculiar kind of political economy and political system of the post-Confederate American South.
Again?
That the political economy of the post-Confederate American South has now become hegemonic in the United States. And what might you, and because I think that's kind of, I think Michael's presentation really sort of took us there. And if we're thinking about wielding federal government power in a New Deal of some kind, what would you do about that?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. Can you hear me? Yeah, I've written a couple of books about it. One was Made in Texas, George W. Bush and the Southern Takeover of American Politics. My interpretation since the 1980s has been that whereas the New Deal, or at least the progressives in the New Deal, wanted to northernize the South, in fact, the South has southernized the North. And you can see this already with George Wallace. When he goes north, finds a lot of support, and he says the whole country is Alabama. And I think there were two phases, and Trump is phase two. So the first phase, historically, Texas and the other southern states were kind of, run by courthouse gangs, and they were very oligarchical, and you didn't really have flourishing, unions were suppressed. You had, disfranchisement of voters on class as well as racial lines, and you ended up with a kind of, it wasn't left or right political system. It was the oligarchs. Now and then you would have populists, sometimes like the Fergusons in Texas or Huey Long in Louisiana. They would do a few things for ordinary people, but most of the time they were simply co-opted or defeated by the big mules, as I think Jim Folsom called them. And this is my concern, that basically the entire United States now, we've kind of nationalized politics, and it looks very much like, as you say, it's the New South. It's not the Confederacy, but it's the New South pattern where, here's a little Trivial Pursuit question. The first state economic agency, economic development agency, was founded by Mississippi in the early 1900s, and its purpose was to lure factories from the South by lower wages and lower regulations and lower taxes and things like that. So we've had this kind of race to the bottom Southern model of capitalism. It's been extended now more and more across the entire country. And in the absence of unions, I don't think you can underestimate the importance of unions for organizing big elements of the working class, maybe not all of it. And when they disintegrate here and in Europe, you get this kind of anomic working class, or precariat even, where they really have no connection to any institutions that have any clout in politics. The parties are kind of run, Peter Mayer talks about the decline of the parties. You get the idea of cartel parties. It's, Professor Ferguson has written eloquently on the donors, kind of dominating all of that. So I think that's kind of the story, that you see a kind of Southernization of American and to some degree Western European politics, and if it's not arrested, I think you get this doom loop between oligarchs and the occasional demagogic populist who either fizzles out or is co-opted by the establishment. And I don't see any electoral political answer to this. I mean, electoral politics is part of it, but I have a book called The New Class War coming out in January from Penguin. I argue you need to rebuild these intermediary institutions, like trade unions, in a form appropriate for the 21st century. They don't have to be the old form. You have to have local governments, even micro-governments, that people can participate in. But absent these participatory mass membership organizations, I think we're looking at kind of a bleak future.
I'll add something to that just very, very quickly. Here's the other challenge that especially the Democrats have, and in the context of the Green New Deal, which is that they've got to win over a large number of states in the middle part of the country, the red states, that are highly dependent on the fossil fuel industries. I think directly and indirectly, that's about 2.3 million jobs. And they are high-paying, high-quality jobs. I see this up in Canada as well. It's a similar problem that you have resource-rich regions which are do very, very well. And the challenge is that you're talking about a major reconstruction of the economy, but if you're just going to achieve this through, say, market mechanisms like carbon taxes, and not really offer a genuine alternative, then it's going to be hard to win back those people. And I would say that the other aspect of this, not to sound a bit like a skunk at the party, but I think the whole Russiagate problem and the collective Democratic Party approach on this issue has actually strengthen that hegemonic national security state wing that you've discussed as well. And I think that's another big problem that Democrats are going to have to deal with after 2020. So those are my 2 bits to add to that.
Tom,
just very quickly, I agree with Mike when he says, without participatory structures, it's not going to happen. I don't have a problem with his diagnosis. I would raise a question about, let's think carefully about the Southern metaphor. One could just as well say he didn't Southernize the United States, you just went back to the Gilded Age. I mean, it's not as though capitalists in the North like unions or social welfare states or any of that stuff. And indeed, if you look at how this happened, you will not find like lots of money pouring out of the South into the North. It's rather the reverse. Sometime look at Mitch McConnell's contributions. There was Larry Bartels had a line he was walking around with, a political scientist, saying, well, you know, all right, we admit that the voters don't control, the median voter doesn't control things. That's that 51st voter in a row of 100. But, you know, maybe it's the 70th income percentile in each state. The problem is that money crosses state lines. And it's like, when the Senate was going down in 2016, you could buy an Iowa electronic markets contract that would pay you $100 if the Republicans saved the Senate for themselves in late October of 2016 for $7.25 or so. That's how little people thought they could win. Tons of money rolled in those final weeks, and they turned it around. I ran into Senator Russell Feingold after the election. He said, yeah, I remember we were all ahead. And then all this cash came rolling in. That money was mostly not coming from the South. I've actually itemized that one in a recent piece. But that, Southernize here basically just means we go back to sort of laissez-faire capitalism. It could as well be the Gilded Age in the second Gilded Age.
There we go.
Thank you. Marshall started touching on the question I have, and electricity was mentioned, the Railroad Commission and the history. So in terms of a New Deal, what are similarities and what are differences between the availability of the energy resources that might be behind constructing a New Deal and the infrastructure that might be directly energy related or indirectly related? So what's the differences between a New Deal now and a New Deal in the 1930s with regard to the available energy resources?
You want me to answer that, or?
Anyone.
Well, Mike, you want to?
Electricity, for now, compared with New Deal, New Deal electricity is wide-band internet for everybody. It is exactly this, well, not exactly the same, very similar determinants, economic mechanism, and consequences. The big difference is that it is affecting us as the individuals, and it has a great deal of the style of life and consumption, maybe even bigger than the electricity. But this is the qualitative change. So I would say that what the internet is doing for economy and style of life with some cultural consequences is similar to the electricity and electrification.
I would just add that ironically, I think if you wanted a global energy transition, it would have been easier in the pre-OPEC era when you had this cartelized system, both in the United States and globally. The Texas Railroad Commission controlled Texas swing production through quotas, and it was allied with the U.S. Bureau of Mines, right?
And all the other state oil commissions which had to follow those.
Right. So you couldn't smuggle and you know, have this black market in oil. And then you had the Seven Sisters. It was this, you know, informal cartel internationally. And since antitrust is very much a thing on the center left now, it's very amusing that Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy, Johnson administrations, you have these Department of Justice lawyers always going after these cartels. And you have, for national security reasons and business reasons, these Democratic commissions sort of killing the investigations. I think it becomes much more difficult, you know, where you have true markets and you don't have this kind of structure where you have kind of bureaucratic guidance in making these transitions.
Anyone else on that one? Okay. All right. Lovely right there.
Am I allowed to say something without a question mark at the end?
As long as it's brief. All right.
Yeah, well, I think it's an important point, referring to Marshall, what you were saying about the impact of a green transition on the fossil fuel sector. And of course, in principle, what you're saying is right, but I think you greatly overstate the magnitude of the problem. One, you said it was 2.5 million jobs, according to my own research, including auxiliary industries, oil, coal, natural gas, auxiliary industries such as service and so forth. It's more like 900,000, so that's a big difference.
Directly and indirectly.
Directly and indirectly, so that's 900,000. Of which coal, there's 60,000 people in this country employed in the entire coal industry. Jamie made a good comparison yesterday when we were talking about it. He said, you could put them all in the Texas Longhorn Stadium and you wouldn't even fill it up. So we can address this through just transition policies that won't have to be that challenging. On top of that, let's say it's 1 million people, but the transition is not going to take place at one moment. It's going to occur over a generation. It's going to occur over 30 years. So what we're really looking at is, 30,000 people a year, let's say, or 40,000 in any case, that would need to be transitioned into something else, of which a significant percentage over this full period are going to be moving into voluntary retirement. This is not a major challenge if we think it through carefully. Of course, we have to deal with it, and we have to find, for the people who will be displaced, we do have to find alternatives. We have to find training alternatives. For the communities, we need reinvestment. We need to do land reclamation. But I think it's really a bad mistake to pose this as an overarching, insurmountable problem.
I didn't suggest it was insurmountable. I don't want to also get into a battle of statistics. I have different data, but anyway, the point is that it's something that's got to be dealt with, and that's obviously it's not going to happen from the Republican side, or it's unlikely to happen from the Republican side. And I would like to see Democrats doing more to focus on these just transition aspects. That was my point. It was not that it's insurmountable. It's that they haven't yet addressed it. It's not been done credibly, and it's not been done in a way that gives comfort, I think, to people that are in those jobs right now in important swing states where those, even if you want to use 900,000, those votes do matter in an electoral college sense. So that's what's really my point, as opposed to whether it can be done or not.
Okay, well, I have just as a brief follow-up, I myself have worked with the labor movement in 3 states in the last year and a half on exactly this issue, and others, but New York, Colorado, and Washington State. So they are focused on it. And in my view, they're doing serious, credible work, and it should be supported. Of course, it should be understood more. If people don't know about it, they should follow up. But I would argue that this is absolutely central to the overall Green New Deal, and so I agree with you on that. But let's not overstate the magnitude of the problem.
We have time for one more question right there. Yeah.
Hello. I'm just curious, the radio was such a huge part of how FDR was talking about the Green New Deal with the fireside chats. What do you think the new left could, or the left could use in order to kind of talk about the Green New Deal now in a similar vein? And who would be doing those discussions now?
Tweets.
They're so warm and comforting, aren't they? Tweets.
The best best means of communications to get out the ideas of the Green New Deal today, analogous to radio in the 1930s. Oh, come on. Somebody's got to have an answer on this. Tom.
All right, look, one might begin by noting that back in the 30s, there was some regulation of broadcasting that was fairly serious. It's interesting that, for instance, hardly any radio station carried news of strikes or labor until the government told them to do it in the middle of the war. And I think the broader point, which people do tend to forget, Larry Goodwin, who came from Texas and wrote the best book, I think, ever on actual populism, made the point that the populists in the 1890s had their own press. That was really crucial to their electoral success. In the 30s, that didn't happen, though the broadcasting folks were somewhat finely regulated, as I mentioned. But the commercial papers were mostly hostile to the New Deal. If you actually go back and look at like editor and publisher in that period, there about 9 out of 10 publishers newspapers endorsed Landon, say in 36, and those numbers didn't change much. Now, that has led some people to wonder whether the papers were all that influential. We can argue about that some other time. I think it is a problem today that, I mean, if you just look at the coverage in the major papers, the Washington Post or sometimes the New York Times, on the war and wealth thing, although the Times seems to be undergoing a bit of a change, the coverage is often quite amazing, and particularly on Sanders. You can hardly believe it. There was a period in 2016 when I think the Post ran 16 anti-Sanders articles in like 24 hours. It's not obvious to me how you deal with this type of a problem when the broadcast media is in the hands of the super rich, and most of the smaller papers they're not papers, they're internet sites. These are often owned by private equity folks. And they're using very young people, and they recycle them through. There was a quarter last spring when I think 1,000 people in New York got flushed out of various media places all at once. It's a problem. I'm not sure there's a happy ending. If you want a happy ending, see a Disney movie.
Well, and speaking of happy endings, I do think we need to bring this panel to a happy ending since it is 10:30. Please join me in thanking all these panelists.